they did a laparoscopic surgery. So they went in laparoscopically and looked at the cyst, and it was a teratoma, which is kind of crazy because they can like grow things in them, like hair and eyeballs and teeth, which is really creepy. Yeah. All right, my name is Abbey Gray, and I am a mom of two and also a speech language pathologist, feeding therapist, and lactation counselor. So I started having really bad lower back pain just randomly when I was about 5 weeks postpartum. I also was dealing with constipation really, really badly after his birth, and I subsequently had prolapse, which I knew nothing about, didn't know that was a thing. And so I felt like that lower back pain was related to my constipation or my prolapse. But it got so bad to the point where I was like, I can't even like stand up. Moving from like standing to sitting was extremely painful. So I decided that I was going to go to urgent care because it just got to the point where I was really, really in a lot of pain. So I went to urgent care, I want to say around like, I don't know, 10 or 11 in the morning. And it was during COVID. So I didn't bring Caleb, is my son's name. I didn't bring Caleb with me. And I think my husband just stayed at home with Caleb, and I went into urgent care. And then I think I had breastfed Caleb right before I left. And then I went to urgent care and they ran a bunch of tests and they couldn't figure out what was going on. They did an CAT scan. They did a transvaginal ultrasound. And then I can't remember what other tests they did, maybe an x-ray. And I think it was on the CAT scan that they saw that there was a cyst on my ovary, but they weren't sure how big it was. I think they said it was only like 6 centimeters or something like that. But this was like a whole day process of them running tests and trying to get it back. And I didn't bring my pump with me. And in hindsight, I wish that I had brought my pump with me or had Caleb with me or had my husband bring me my pump. Because I think he ended up coming and meeting me at urgent care because I went from like 10 o'clock in the morning to like 8 p.m. Without pumping. And this is after, having a 5-week-old, they're eating every few hours. And so they were like, okay, we're going to have to get you into the hospital to remove the cyst because I can't remember if they could figure out how big it was, but they wanted me to go into the hospital. So I went to the emergency room at the hospital and they ran some more tests and we just kind of like waited around. And then finally they came in and they were like, okay, the OR is open. It's this magical time of night where there's nobody in there. So we're going to take you in for surgery. So it was a lot of waiting around. And then all of a sudden it was like, okay, you don't really have a decision to make. Like this surgery is happening because you have an ovarian cyst and it's torsed, like it's twisted. So that's what's causing you the pain. And the doctor was like, the OBGYN that was on call was like, we are going to go in there and we're going to try to just remove the cyst. But if we go in and we find that it's cut off the blood flow to your ovary or your fallopian tube, those might have to be removed too. So just giving you a heads up about that. And, in the moment, I didn't really know what that meant, but I was like, well, what does that mean for future fertility? And they said it shouldn't impact that at all. So they took me in for surgery, and that was kind of scary because, I was like, hopefully it will go okay. And, I have this baby at home that I'm really nervous about leaving alone. And so I just remember like calling my mom who was with my baby at the time, just being like, okay, tell Caleb that I love him. And, and so that was scary. Thankfully, everything ended up being okay. I had to go under general anesthesia. They did a laparoscopic surgery. So they went in laparoscopically and looked at the cyst, and it was a teratoma, which is kind of crazy because they can like grow things in them, like hair and eyeballs and teeth, which is really creepy. Yeah. Um, yeah. I don't know. It's like the cells that are inside it, like create these things, like teeth and whatnot. I guess mine didn't have any teeth or eyeballs, but had a bunch of hair. So anyway, it had twisted 7 times, which is why I had so much pain. And the doctor was like, I've never seen it. And it was the size of a grapefruit. And it had cut off the blood flow to my left ovary and fallopian tube. So they had to remove my ovary, fallopian tube, and the cyst. And thankfully, it was benign. So they did do a biopsy on it, and it was benign, thank God. But yeah, the recovery from that surgery was really rough. I don't know if I'm assuming it would have grown bigger. It probably would have, there probably would have been more torsion, like twisting of it. But yeah, I don't know. I mean, I wish that they had, or I had found it prior to it getting so large. It in my pregnancy obviously was having a lot of ultrasounds, and I remember in my last ultrasound, that wasn't supposed to be my last ultrasound, but it ended up being because he was born early. They did say, oh, you have a cyst on your left ovary, but it's small and it's no big deal, like we'll just keep an eye on it. Eventually it might have to be removed so that we can prevent it from growing or twisting. But it was very much like, no big deal, down the road, we might have to take a look at this. So my OBGYN who followed me throughout my pregnancy, she thinks that maybe it just like went into overdrive with my pregnancy and delivery hormones. I don't know. It's just crazy that that happened. And so that coming off of, general anesthesia, and like I said, I don't have a good reaction to medications, so I was nauseous. And I have a gluten allergy, so they were like, oh, you can have some crackers. And I was like, no, I can't because I will be sick. And so I think I had like a popsicle and some soda. I think I ended up throwing up, and I just felt terrible, and I couldn't move because they went in 3 different areas on my abdomen, like in my belly button and then on each side of my abdomen. And the nurse, I remember asking the nurse, like, oh, did they have to remove my ovary and fallopian tube? And she was like, oh, let me look at your chart. And she looked at my chart and she was like, oh, no, just the cyst. And so I was like, oh, that's great. And so as soon as I could like sit up kind of, and they put me in a wheelchair and wheeled me out to the car to my husband. It's technically like a not outpatient, but it's not an overnight. Like you can leave once it's done. So we got in the car to drive home, and I remember saying to my husband, like, "Oh, that's great that they didn't have to remove my ovary and fallopian tube," and he was like, "What? Yeah, they did." And so that was really difficult because I was like, but the nurse told me they didn't have to, and she must have misread my chart. So that was kind of like, oh, not what I had expected. And so that was a little bit rough to like come to terms with. And then I remember when we were driving home, anytime he would go over a bump, I'd be like, it's really painful in my abdomen. And then the recovery process was really difficult. Like I was under the impression that it wasn't going to be that difficult because it was laparoscopic, but it was really, really, really hard. And I also didn't want to take any pain meds above like Tylenol and ibuprofen because I was breastfeeding. And the nurses were like, "Oh, it's fine. You can take." I can't remember what they prescribed me, OxyContin maybe or oxycodone, one of the painkillers. And I never ended up taking it because I just didn't feel comfortable with it, especially with my training, like looking up the side effects that could happen for the baby. So I just kind of powered through with, a steady rotation of acetaminophen and ibuprofen, and that. But it was still really painful, and especially breastfeeding was really hard because the positions that we had been breastfeeding in were not really working as much anymore because of where my surgery incisions were. So we kind of had to figure out different breastfeeding positions to get into. And then it seemed kind of like things were taking a turn with breastfeeding. Like he was falling asleep. Previous to this, I do remember he was a sleepy feeder. So he would fall asleep a lot while he was breastfeeding. But it happened even more so after this, it felt like. And I was unsure about my supply. And then, so between his 2-month doctor's visit and the 3-month one, he actually only I can't remember. I think he either only gained half an ounce or he lost half an ounce. So that was scary because it was like, he's supposed to be gaining all this weight and now he's dropping percentiles. And, he was like 99th percentile when he was born and he was dropping like really steadily down. And so that's when I started going to see lactation consultants and trying to investigate what was going on with my supply and figuring out other breastfeeding positions.